There are moments in life that change everything. Not the big, obvious ones that you see coming from miles away. No, I'm talking about the ones that sneak up on you when you least expect them. The kind of moment that splits your existence into before and after, leaving you scrambling to understand who you've become in the aftermath. For me, that moment happened on a Tuesday afternoon, beside a loch that had always felt like my own private sanctuary, where I'd never dreamed that saving a child's life would set off a chain of events so extraordinary, so impossibly beautiful and terrifying all at once, that I'd spend the rest of my days wondering if I was living a dream or if reality had finally caught up with the deepest desires of my heart. But before I tell you what happened, before I pull back the curtain on the world of the Highlands that exists just beyond the veil of the ordinary, I need you to understand something fundamental about me. My name is Moira, just Moira, though my family called me Maury when I was small and still believed that the mountains held no secrets worth keeping. I'm 28 years old, or at least I was before everything changed. I lived in the village of Bella, a small, picturesque collection of stone cottages and narrow streets that clung to the edge of Loch Lomond like it was afraid of drowning. The kind of place where everyone knows your business, where secrets don't stay buried for long, and where the line between the supernatural and the ordinary has always been thinner than most people realize. I'd always been different from the other villagers. Even as a child, I felt things more intensely than other people. The pull of the moon, the ancient energy that seemed to vibrate through the earth beneath my feet, the way animals seemed to understand me in ways they never understood anyone else. My grandmother used to say I had the sight, that I could see beyond the veil that separated the human world from the realm of magic and creatures of legend. I never believed her, not really. I was too practical, too grounded in the modern world to accept such fantastical notions. Or so I told myself. I worked as a nurse at the local hospital, a 45-minute drive from Bella to the nearest city. I tended to patients, held the hands of the dying, brought comfort to those in pain. It was meaningful work, work that fulfilled something deep within my soul. But I always felt like I was meant for something more, something bigger. I just could never quite figure out what that something was. The loch had always been my escape. I'd go there on my days off, usually in the late afternoon when the light turned golden and the water reflected the mountains like a mirror held up to the heavens. I'd walk along the rocky shore, breathing in the crisp Scottish air, feeling the centuries of history that seemed to pulse through this land. That particular Tuesday in September was no different, or so I thought. Now here's where I need to ask you something. I need you to stay with me through this story, because what I'm about to tell you challenges everything you think you know about reality. And I need that from you, that willingness to believe in the impossible. Because the truth is, there are wonders in this world that most people will never experience. There are realms of magic and danger and extraordinary love that exist just beyond the edge of what we call civilization. And if you're brave enough to follow me into those realms, I promise you'll never look at the world the same way again. But before we go any further, I want to know, where are you right now? What city are you watching from? Tell me, and I'll send you a hug across the distance. Because I want you to know that wherever you are, whatever brought you to listen to this story, you're exactly where you're meant to be. This story is for you, the dreamer, the believer, the one who's always sensed that there's more to life than what meets the eye. And I want you to feel connected to me as I take you on this journey. So please tell me your city. Let me know you're there with me. The reason I'm asking is because stories are meant to be shared, and shared stories are only half as powerful when they exist in isolation. So connect with me. Tell me where you are, and then continue reading because what comes next will absolutely blow your mind. That Tuesday afternoon, I arrived at my favorite spot by the loch around 3 o'clock. The sun was still high enough to warm the earth, but there was already a chill in the air that spoke of autumn's approach. The mountains surrounding the loch were beginning to blaze with color, golds and oranges and deep crimsons that made the landscape look almost otherworldly. I'd brought a thermos of tea and a book I'd been meaning to read for months, one of those escapist romances that helped me forget, for a little while, how empty my personal life had become. I was settling onto my favorite rock, the smooth gray stone worn by centuries of water and wind, when I heard it. At first, it was just a sound, a cry high-pitched and desperate, that cut through the afternoon air like a blade. I looked up from my book, my heart immediately quickening. It came again, and this time I was certain. It was a child's scream. I jumped to my feet, my eyes scanning the shoreline. The loch stretched out before me, its waters dark and deep, and I felt a jolt of pure terror strike through my chest. The scream had come from the water. "Hello!" I called out, moving quickly along the rocky shore. "Can you hear me?" There, about 30 meters out, thrashing in the water, was a small figure. Even from that distance, I could see the panic, the desperate flailing that spoke of someone drowning. Without another thought, I kicked off my shoes and ran into the water. The loch was cold, so bitterly, shockingly cold that it drove the breath from my lungs. But I pushed forward, my years of training as a nurse kicking in, overriding my fear. The child, I could see now, was a boy, perhaps 5 or 6 years old, with pale skin and dark hair plastered to his forehead. His mouth opened and closed, gasping for air that wouldn't come. "I'm coming!" I shouted, though I have no idea if he heard me. "Don't give up. I'm right here." The water grew deeper as I moved out, and soon I was swimming, my arms cutting through the icy loch with powerful strokes. The boy was going under, sinking, and I could feel panic threatening to overwhelm me. I'd trained for water rescues, had practiced the techniques over and over in training sessions. But this was real, and the weight of that reality nearly crushed me. I reached him just as he went under for the last time. My hand closed around his small arm, slick and cold, and I pulled him upward with every ounce of strength I possessed. His head broke the surface, and he coughed violently, water pouring from his mouth and nose. "Breathe," I commanded, my voice steady despite the chaos in my mind. "Just breathe, little one. I've got you." I hooked my arm around his chest and began swimming backward, toward the shore, moving as quickly as I could while supporting his weight. The loch seemed to fight me, the water growing colder the farther I swam, and I wondered briefly if I was going to make it, if both of us were going to die here in this water that suddenly felt more like a living thing than a body of liquid. But I didn't let myself entertain that thought for long. Instead, I focused on the shore, on the line of rocks and grass that seemed impossibly far away. I focused on the feeling of the child's small body in my arms, on the responsibility I carried to keep this life safe. I pushed through the exhaustion, through the cold that was beginning to numb my limbs, and I swam. When my feet finally touched bottom, I nearly collapsed from relief and exhaustion. I staggered toward the shore, carrying the boy, half crawling onto the rocks. The child was coughing, his skin the color of old parchment, and I knew that even though I'd pulled him from the water, he wasn't out of danger yet. I laid him on his back, checking his airway, clearing any remaining water from his mouth. He coughed again, more violently, and then began to breathe. Ragged, desperate breaths, but breaths nonetheless. I checked for a pulse, found it thready but present, and began to warm him as best I could, stripping off my soaking wet sweater and wrapping it around his small frame. "You're going to be okay," I whispered, not sure if I was trying to convince him or myself. "You're safe now. I've got you." It was only then, as I was reaching for my phone to call emergency services, that I noticed something extraordinary. The boy's eyes were open, and they were looking at me with an intensity that seemed far too old, far too aware for a child of his age. His pupils had an almost amber glow to them, luminous in a way that made my skin prickle with recognition of something beyond my understanding. "Thank you," he whispered. His voice soft but filled with a weight that seemed to echo with authority far beyond his years. "Thank you for saving me." Before I could respond, before I could ask him his name or figure out what was going on, I heard voices calling out from somewhere inland. Male voices, deep and urgent, shouting a name I didn't recognize. The boy's eyes widened, and he grabbed my hand with surprising strength. "My father," he said. His voice filled with something that might have been fear or excitement. I couldn't quite tell. "My father is coming." The voices grew louder, more urgent. I could hear footsteps now, multiple sets, moving quickly through the undergrowth. Within seconds they emerged onto the shore. 3 men, all tall and imposing, all moving with a kind of coordinated grace that spoke of military training or something equally precise. But it was the man in the center who commanded my attention. He was the tallest of the three, with broad shoulders and a chest that tapered to a lean waist. He had dark hair, nearly black, with threads of silver at the temples, and a face that looked like it had been carved from stone, all sharp angles and intense features. But it was his eyes that stopped me cold. They were the same amber as the boy's, glowing with an inner light that made my breath catch in my throat. When he saw the boy, something shifted in his face, a flash of raw emotion so powerful that I could feel it even from where I stood, dripping wet and shaking. He covered the distance between us in a few long strides, and without a word, he knelt beside his son, gathering the small boy into his arms. "Murdoch," he breathed, pressing his face into the child's hair. "Oh, my son. Thank the gods." I stood there, shivering, watching this scene unfold before me. There was something otherworldly about this moment, something that seemed to exist outside the normal flow of time. The three men, all of them with that same amber glow to their eyes, all of them emanating a kind of raw power that I could feel vibrating through the air, seemed to exist in their own realm, separate from the ordinary world that I inhabited. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only a minute or two, the large man looked up at me. His amber eyes, now filled with something that looked like gratitude mixed with awe, locked onto mine. "You saved him," he said, his voice deep and resonant, with an accent that suggested the Scottish Highlands, though refined and educated. "You pulled my son from the water." Yes," I stammered, suddenly aware of how cold I was, how much I was shaking. "He was drowning. I couldn't just." "What is your name?" he asked, rising to his feet while cradling his son against his chest. "Moira," I said. "Moira MacLeod." Something flickered across his face then, recognition or perhaps resonance. He was silent for a long moment, his amber eyes studying me with an intensity that made me feel like he was looking straight into my soul, seeing parts of me that I kept hidden even from myself. "I am Laird Caelan MacLeod," he said finally, his voice carrying the weight of authority and centuries. "Alpha King of the Highlands. My son Murdoch owes you his life, and for that, you have my eternal gratitude." I opened my mouth to respond, but I had no words. Laird, Alpha King. The terms didn't quite compute in my mind, though something in my bones seemed to understand exactly what he was saying, even as my rational mind rejected it. "Come," he said, gesturing to one of his companions. "We must get you warm before you fall ill. Murdoch as well. Both of you could have died today." Before I could protest, before I could explain that I needed to get home or that I had a shift at the hospital the next morning or anything else that might have anchored me to my normal life, I found myself being ushered away from the loch by these strange, powerful men. As we walked, I couldn't help but notice the way the man they called Laird Caelan kept looking back at me. His eyes filled with something that I couldn't quite identify. It looked almost like longing, like recognition of something long lost and suddenly found. It was a look that would change my life forever. Laird Caelan's home, though home seemed like far too small a word for what it was, sat nestled in the mountains about 15 kilometers from Bella. It was an enormous castle, all stone and towers and ancient architecture, the kind of place that seemed to exist outside of time. How I'd lived my entire life in the nearby village without knowing of its existence, I couldn't fathom. But as we approached, I realized that there were spells woven into the very landscape, enchantments that made the castle invisible to those who weren't meant to see it. That realization should have terrified me. In many ways it did. But it also felt like coming home, like some deep part of me had always known that this realm existed and had simply been waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. I was taken to a guest room, an enormous chamber with a four-poster bed, a fireplace where a log fire crackled cheerfully, and windows that looked out over the mountains. An elderly woman, introduced to me as Mrs. Ailsa, brought me warm clothes and wrapped me in soft blankets. She seemed to understand, without being told, exactly what I needed. She brought me hot tea with honey, a bowl of broth, fresh bread with butter. She clucked over me like a mother hen, muttering under her breath about humans having no sense and running into the loch like they were part seal. "Humans?" asked, the word feeling strange on my tongue. "What do you mean, humans?" Mrs. Ailsa paused, her weathered face turning toward me. She had kind eyes, and they held the weight of centuries of knowledge. "You mean to tell me you don't know?" she asked softly. "Know what? What you are, child. Where you are. What the laird is." I shook my head slowly, my heart beginning to race. "I'm just a nurse from the village. I live in Blah. I was at the loch for an afternoon walk when I found the boy." "And you pulled a werewolf pup from the water," Mrs. Ailsa said matter-of-factly, as if she were discussing something entirely ordinary. "And in doing so, you've caught the attention of the Alpha King of all the Highlands. That's no small thing, lass. That's the kind of thing that changes destinies." I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. Werewolf, Alpha King. These were things that belonged in books and films, not in my rational modern world. And yet, the way the boy's eyes had glowed, the amber luminescence in all three of the men's eyes, the raw power I'd sensed emanating from them, the castle that had been invisible until we approached it. "I don't understand," I whispered. "No," Mrs. Ailsa said, her voice gentle. "Not yet. But the laird will explain everything. For now, you need to rest and recover from your ordeal. Then we'll see what the fates have in store for you." She left me alone in that beautiful room, and I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to make sense of what was happening. Part of me wanted to run, to flee this castle and return to my normal life, to the rational world where werewolves and alpha kings were purely fictional constructs. But another part of me, the part that had always felt different, that had always sensed there was more to reality than what I could see, wanted to stay, wanted to learn, wanted to understand what was happening to me. I must have fallen asleep because the next thing I knew, it was evening and there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Laird Caelan standing in the hallway, freshly showered and dressed in dark trousers and a black shirt that made his amber eyes seem even more luminous. He looked at me with an intensity that made my breath catch. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Better," I said, which was only partially true. I was warm and dry and had been fed well, but my mind was still reeling from everything that had happened. "Your son, is Murdoch all right?" "He's perfectly fine thanks to you," Caelan said. "He's resting in his chambers. The healers have checked him over. He'll have no lasting effects from the near-drowning, and I have you to thank for that. If you hadn't been there..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. We both knew what would have happened. "I was just at the right place at the right time," I said, though even as I spoke the words, I wasn't sure I believed them. "No," Caelan said, stepping closer. "I don't believe in coincidence, Moira. The fates don't deal in accidents. There's something more at work here. That's what I wanted to talk to you about. Will you come with me?" Against my better judgment, I nodded. He held out his hand, and after only the slightest hesitation, I took it. His skin was warm, almost hot, and the moment our fingers touched, I felt a jolt of electricity run through me. The sensation was so intense that I nearly pulled my hand away, but something in me, some deep instinctual part, wanted to hold on. He led me through the corridors of the castle, which seemed to go on endlessly, all stone walls and ancient tapestries and portraits of people with amber eyes who seemed to watch us as we passed. Finally, we arrived at a large study, all dark wood and bookshelves that stretched from floor to ceiling. A fire crackled in the fireplace, and the room smelled of old leather and whiskey and something else, something wild and ancient. "Sit," Caelan said, gesturing to a leather chair near the fire. I sat, and he poured 2 glasses of amber liquid from a crystal decanter. He handed one to me, and I sipped it cautiously. It was whiskey, smooth and complex, and it warmed me from the inside out. "I owe you an explanation," Caelan said, settling into the chair across from me. "About what I am. About what you saw today. About why you felt drawn to save my son, even though you didn't know him." "Okay," I said slowly. "Explain." He took a drink of his whiskey, his eyes never leaving mine. "I am a werewolf, Moira, as is my son, and as are all who dwell within this castle. We are not the monsters of legend. We are a people, with our own culture and traditions and way of life. We shift between human and wolf form, and we exist in secret alongside humanity. Hidden by ancient magic that keeps our castles invisible and our presence unknown to the outside world. I should have been terrified. I should have run. But instead I found myself leaning forward, fascinated. How many of you are there? Asked. Thousands, he said. Spread throughout the Highlands and beyond. We have our own government, our own laws, our own society. I am the Alpha King, the leader of all the werewolves in the British Isles. It's a responsibility that never truly ends. This is insane, I whispered. You're telling me there's an entire society of werewolves living right under everyone's noses? Not everyone's, Caelan said. Only the people who are meant to know. People like you. Why would I be meant to know? Asked. I'm just a nurse from a small village. Caelan was silent for a long moment. Then he set down his glass and leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. Because you're not just a nurse from a small village, Moira, he said softly. You're a seer. Someone born with the gift of the sight. Someone who can perceive the magical realm even when it's hidden from ordinary humans. It's rare, very rare. Most people with a gift are born into werewolf families, where the secret is known from birth. But occasionally one is born to humans, someone like you, who grows up not understanding their abilities, not fully grasping what they can perceive. How could you possibly know that? I demanded. Because I can smell it on you, he said, and there was something almost primal in the way he said it. Magic recognizes magic. Power recognizes power. And you, Moira MacLeod, have more power than you realize. I wanted to dismiss what he was saying as nonsense, but I couldn't. Because deep down, on some level I'd never fully acknowledged, I knew he was right. I'd always sensed things others couldn't. I'd always felt the pull of magic, even though I'd rationalized it away as intuition or coincidence. Why does it matter? Asked. Why does any of this matter to you? Caelan stood and walked to the window, his back to me. When he spoke again, his voice was quiet, almost vulnerable. Because when a werewolf meets their fated mate, they know, he said. It's not something we choose. It's not something we can control. Simply is. And the moment I saw you pulling my son from the water, the moment I looked into your eyes for the first time, I knew. My heart stopped. I couldn't breathe. Knew what? I whispered, though I already knew the answer. He turned to face me, and his eyes were glowing more brightly than ever before. That you are my mate, Moira. That the fates have bound us together, and that nothing in this world or any other could change that. I left that study in a daze. What Caelan had told me, that I was his mate, that we were fated to be together, that the universe itself had decided our destinies were intertwined. It was too much, too overwhelming, too completely outside the realm of anything I'd ever experienced. Mrs. Ailsa had prepared a light supper for me in my room, soup and bread and fresh fruit. I ate mechanically, not really tasting anything, my mind spinning with the revelation. Fated mate. It sounded like something from one of those romance novels I secretly read, not like something that could actually happen in real life. But then again, a few hours ago, I would have said the same thing about werewolves and enchanted castles and alpha kings. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the four-poster bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind howl outside the castle walls. I thought about my life before today, the quiet routine of work and home and the loch, the vague sense that something was missing, that I was meant for something more. Had I been subconsciously waiting for this? For him? Or was I being manipulated by forces beyond my understanding? By morning I'd made a decision. I needed answers, real answers, not just the cryptic explanations that Caelan had given me. I needed to understand what was happening, to process it all, before I could even begin to consider what he was suggesting. Mrs. Ailsa appeared at my door just after dawn, as if she'd known I'd be awake, carrying a tray with tea and fresh bread. The laird thought you might like breakfast, she said, setting the tray on a small table by the window. And then, if you're up for it, he'd like to show you more of the castle. Help you understand. I want to go home, I said, the words coming out more sharply than I intended. To Bala. I need time to think about all of this. Mrs. Ailsa nodded slowly, as if she'd expected this. The Laird said you might say that. He also said it would be your choice. He'll take you back himself if that's what you want. So after a quick breakfast, I found myself once again in Caelan's company. He drove me in an enormous black Range Rover that seemed to navigate the hidden paths through the mountains with ease. We didn't speak much during the drive. I was too confused, too overwhelmed, and he seemed to sense my need for space. When we arrived at my small cottage in Bala, he turned to me with those intense amber eyes. I know this is overwhelming, he said. I know you need time to process everything. But I need you to know something, Moira. The bond between mates is real. It's not just some supernatural notion. It's a fundamental connection that links our souls, our magic, our very beings. You'll feel it, even when we're apart. You'll know where I am, and I'll know where you are. You'll sense my emotions, my thoughts. It will grow stronger every day. There's nothing you can do to stop it, but there's also nothing to fear. How long do I have? I asked quietly. Before it becomes something I can't ignore. Days, he said. Maybe a week or two. The bond grows exponentially once it's been acknowledged. Fighting it only makes it stronger. Accepting it, on the other hand, can be quite pleasurable. There was something in the way he said that last word, pleasurable, that sent a shiver down my spine and made me hyper-aware of how close he was sitting to me. I need time, I repeated, opening the car door. Take all the time you need, he said. But know that I'll be waiting, Moira. I've waited my entire life for you. I can wait a little longer. The next week was a blur of confusion and anticipation and fear. I went back to work at the hospital, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy. But nothing felt normal anymore. I could feel Caelan's presence like a thread woven through my consciousness. When he was happy, I felt a warmth spread through my chest. When he was frustrated or angry, I felt a tension in my shoulders and neck. I could close my eyes and sense exactly where he was. In his castle in the mountains, in the Highland forests, even occasionally near my village, as if he was keeping watch over me. By the fourth day, I gave in and called him. He answered on the first ring, as if he'd been waiting by the phone. Hi, I said, feeling suddenly shy. Moira, he said, and just hearing my name spoken in his deep voice made my heart race. How are you? I paused, trying to find the right words. I'm confused, scared, fascinated, angry that you've turned my entire world upside down without my permission. And took a breath. I can feel it. Bon. It's getting stronger. I know, he said softly. I can feel it too. It's beautiful, isn't it? This connection between us. It's terrifying, I corrected. That too, he agreed. But also beautiful. Have you thought about what I said? About us? I've thought about nothing else, I admitted. But thinking and accepting are two different things, Caelan. Meet me, he said. Not at the castle. Come to the loch tomorrow evening at sunset. Just you and me. Let me show you what this bond means. Let me show you who I am, without the explanations and the revelations. Sometimes understanding comes not from words, but from experience. Every sensible part of me screamed that I should say no. But there was a deeper part of me, the part that had always felt different, that had always sensed there was more to the world, that was desperate to say yes. Okay, I whispered. Tomorrow at sunset. When I hung up the phone, my hands were shaking. The next day I was a mess. I could barely focus on my work. My patients probably thought I was having a breakdown, though most of them were too self-absorbed to notice. By the time my shift ended at 5 o'clock, I was practically vibrating with nervous energy. I drove straight to the loch, changing into warmer clothes in my car. The September evening was cool, the sun beginning its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and deep purple. I walked along the rocky shore to the place where I'd found Murdoch, and there I waited. He appeared just as the sun touched the mountaintops, stepping out of the tree-line like something from a dream. He was dressed simply, in dark jeans and a gray sweater. His dark hair disheveled. His amber eyes glowing softly in the fading light. "Thank you for coming," he said, approaching me slowly, as if he was afraid I might bolt. "I wasn't sure I would," I admitted. "But you did. That's what matters." He gestured to the loch. "Come with me." "Where?" "You'll see." He took my hand, and that familiar electricity shot through me. He led me along the shore, away from the main path, to a small cove hidden between two rocky outcroppings. There, anchored in the shallow water, was a small sailboat. He helped me aboard, and within minutes we were moving across the loch, the canvas catching the last rays of the setting sun. We didn't speak as we sailed. Caelan seemed content to sit at the helm, one hand on the tiller, his eyes occasionally finding mine. The bond between us seemed to thrum with energy, and I found myself relaxing into it rather than fighting against it. When we were well out on the water, Caelan brought the boat to a stop. He turned to me, and his eyes were more amber now than brown, swirling with colors I'd never seen before. "I want to show you what I am," he said. "The true me, not just the human form. Will you let me?" I knew what he was asking. He wanted to shift, to transform into his wolf form. Every rational part of me screamed that it was a terrible idea. But I nodded anyway. "Okay," I said. He stood and removed his clothes with unhurried grace, until he stood completely naked before me in the fading light. I should have looked away, should have been embarrassed, but I couldn't. His body was perfect, lean and muscular, marked with old scars that spoke of a warrior's life, and there was something beautiful in his vulnerability, in the fact that he was willing to transform in front of me. The transformation began with a sound, a deep, rumbling growl that seemed to come from the very core of the earth. His body began to change, bones shifting and reforming, skin rippling as fur emerged. It should have been horrifying, but it wasn't. It was magnificent. Within seconds, where Caelan had stood, there was now an enormous wolf, easily 7 feet long from nose to tail, with dark fur that shimmered like obsidian in the moonlight. But it was his eyes that remained the same, that distinctive amber, full of intelligence and emotion, watching me carefully to gauge my reaction. "Oh my God," I breathed. The wolf made a low whine, and suddenly I understood that it was Caelan. That this wild, powerful creature was the man I'd been talking to, the Alpha King, my fated mate. Some instinctive part of me understood that I should be afraid. But I wasn't. Instead, I found myself standing up on shaking legs and approaching the wolf. "Caelan," I whispered. The wolf huffed, a sound that was almost like a laugh, and he pressed his massive head against my chest. I buried my fingers in his fur, finding it soft and thick and warm, and I felt tears beginning to stream down my face. "This is insane," I whispered, but I was crying because it wasn't insane. Because on some deep, fundamental level, this made complete and perfect sense. We stayed like that for a long time, the wolf and the human, rocking gently as the boat drifted on the loch. And as we stood there, I felt the bond between us solidify, deepen, transform into something that could never be undone. When Caelan shifted back to his human form, I wasn't surprised or afraid. I simply held him, this beautiful, powerful man who had turned my world upside down. And when he looked down at me, his eyes were soft with emotion. "I've been so alone," he said softly. "For so long. Leading my people, making decisions that affect thousands of lives, never able to share my true self with anyone. And then you came, this fierce, brave woman who didn't even hesitate to run into the water to save a child she didn't know, who didn't care that it might kill her. And I knew that you were the one who could understand me, who could accept me for what I am." "Caelan," I started, but he held up a hand. "You don't have to say anything," he said. "I know you're still processing all of this. I know you have questions and concerns and fears. I know this is happening faster than you would have chosen. But I also know that what we have is real. That the bond between us is one of the most powerful forces in the supernatural realm. And I know that if you're willing to give us a chance, I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret it." He kissed me then, and it was like the entire world dissolved around us. His lips were soft but firm, and they moved against mine with a tenderness that contrasted sharply with the raw power I could feel contained within him. The bond between us flared to life, burning bright and hot, and I could feel his emotions as if they were my own. Love, desire, devotion, and an almost overwhelming need to protect me and cherish me. When he pulled back, I was breathless. "I can't promise you it will be easy," he said. "Being with an alpha king comes with responsibilities and dangers that you can't yet comprehend. There are politics within the werewolf world, rivalries, ancient conflicts. Being my mate will put you in the center of all of that. But I can promise you that I will love you more fiercely than any man has ever loved a woman. And that I will never, ever let anyone or anything harm you." I looked up at him, seeing him truly for the first time, not as a supernatural being or an alpha king, but as a man. A man who had been alone for so long, carrying the weight of his people on his shoulders, waiting for someone to see him for who he really was. "Show me," I said softly. "Show me what it means to be your mate." Over the next 2 weeks, my life transformed in ways I couldn't have imagined. I gave notice at the hospital. I knew I couldn't continue working there once I was tied to the supernatural world in such a profound way. The temptation to use my newfound knowledge would be too great, and there were rules I'd learned about keeping the secret of the werewolves. I spent most of my time between my cottage in Loch and Caelan's castle in the mountains. I got to know the castle better, learning its secret passages and hidden chambers. I met Caelan's son Murdoch, who looked at me with those amber eyes and told me, with the seriousness of a child who was also an ancient soul, that he was glad his father had finally found his mate. I met Caelan's council, a group of powerful werewolves who advised him on matters of state. There was Caelan MacLeod, a scarred warrior with silver streaking his dark hair, who served as Caelan's military commander. There was Ailsa Mackenzie, a woman with fierce red hair and eyes that missed nothing, who managed the affairs of the Highland pack. And there was Gregor MacNab, an older man whose silver hair and kind eyes held the wisdom of centuries. They all watched me with interest, and I realized that my presence among them was not insignificant. That marrying or bonding with an alpha king was a big deal in their world. But the person I became closest to during those 2 weeks was Mrs. Ailsa. I discovered that she was actually one of the oldest members of the pack, having been a companion to Caelan's mother centuries ago. She taught me the history of the werewolves, the ancient bloodlines and the politics that govern their world. She taught me the old ways, the magic that ran through the land, the rituals and traditions that had been passed down through countless generations. "You're a quick learner," she told me one afternoon, as we sat in the castle's library surrounded by books that seemed to predate the invention of the printing press. The laird chose well, even if the fates did half the choosing for him. "What do you mean?" I asked. "Mates are matched by destiny," she explained, her weathered hands carefully turning the pages of an ancient tome. "But they're also matched by compatibility, by complementary strengths and weaknesses. Caelan needed someone strong enough to stand beside him, someone who wouldn't be overwhelmed by his power or his responsibilities, someone who could lead if she needed to, but who also understood the value of compassion and mercy. You are all of those things, Moira. The fates knew what they were doing when they brought you together." On the 10th day, Caelan took me to a place deep in the mountains that he called the Sacred Grove. It was a hidden valley, surrounded by ancient pine trees that towered hundreds of feet into the sky. In the center of the grove was a stone circle, 13 massive stones arranged in a perfect circle, each one carved with symbols that seemed to glow with a soft, ethereal light. "This is where we perform our most important ceremonies," Caelan told me, holding my hand as we approached the circle. "This is where we bond mates, where we mark the transitions between the seasons, where we honor our ancestors and our gods." He led me into the center of the circle and turned to face me, taking both my hands in his. "Moira MacLeod," he said, his voice solemn and filled with ancient power. "I stand before you and before these stones, which have witnessed countless generations of our people. I stand before you as Caelan MacLeod, Alpha King of the Highlands, and I ask you, will you accept the bond between us? Will you become my mate, not just in the eyes of our people, but in your heart and soul? Will you stand beside me, through all the joys and challenges that lie ahead? My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. This was the moment that would change everything. Once I said yes, there would be no going back. I would be forever linked to this man, this world, this life that was so far removed from the quiet existence I'd known before. But as I looked into his amber eyes, I knew there was only one answer I could give. Yes, I whispered. Yes, I will. The stones around us flared to life, brilliant light shooting up from each one, meeting in a brilliant burst above our heads. I felt the bond between us explode outward, expanding, deepening, becoming something so profound and all-consuming that I gasped. I could feel everything Caelan felt. His love for me, burning like a sun at the center of his chest. His fierce protectiveness. His joy at finally having found me. And he could feel everything I felt as well. My fear, my confusion, my love, my willingness to step into this new life with him. When the light faded, I was no longer quite myself. I was still Moira, still the woman I'd always been, but I was also something more now. I was bonded to this man in a way that transcended the merely physical. Our souls were intertwined, our magic flowing between us like two rivers meeting and becoming one. Caelan pulled me close and we kissed, and it was like coming home. Like finally finding the piece of myself that had been missing my whole life. The honeymoon period lasted about 3 weeks. I moved into the castle officially, settling into a suite of rooms that had been prepared for me with exquisite care. Caelan was attentive and loving, showing me the wonders of the supernatural world, introducing me to the traditions and customs of his people, teaching me about the magic that flowed through the Highlands. But as the initial rush of the bonding began to settle, I started to become aware of complications that I hadn't fully understood at first. The first complication was political. Not all of the werewolves in Caelan's realm were happy about his choice of mate. There were those who believed that the Alpha King should bond with someone of pure werewolf blood, someone who understood the culture and the responsibilities from birth. There were whispers that I was a liability, that my human background made me weak, that I would never be able to truly understand what it meant to be an Alpha Queen. The second complication was familial. One evening, about a month after I'd first pulled Murdoch from the loch, there was a formal dinner attended by some of Caelan's extended family. His sister, a woman named Siobhan with striking silver streaks in her dark hair and an attitude to match, made her displeasure with me known in the most cutting way possible. "You're a pretty enough thing, I suppose," she said, cornering me in the hallway after dinner, her voice dripping with disdain. "But you're completely unprepared for what being bonded to Caelan entails. You haven't trained. You don't understand our traditions. You know nothing of the threats that face us. Within a year, you'll either be dead or begging Caelan to break the bond." "That's possible," I said calmly, though her words stung more than I wanted to admit. "But I'm willing to learn. And I think you're underestimating me." "I don't think so," Siobhan said, her eyes flashing amber. "I think you're a liability, and I'm going to make sure the council knows it." She swept away before I could respond, leaving me standing in the hallway with my heart pounding and my confidence shaken. I didn't tell Caelan about the encounter that night. I didn't want him to worry, and I sensed that conflict between him and his sister would be unpleasant. But the bond between us was so strong that he knew something was wrong. He found me in the castle library, curled up with a book I wasn't really reading, and he simply sat down beside me and waited. "Siobhan," I finally admitted. "She doesn't think I'm worthy of being your mate." Caelan's jaw tightened, and I could feel his anger through the bond. But when he spoke, his voice was calm. "My sister's opinion doesn't matter," he said. "The council's opinion doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is what you and I feel for each other. Chose you, Moira. Not because you're a werewolf, but because you're you, strong and brave and true. And I will never, ever regret that choice." He kissed my forehead, and the warmth of his love flowed through the bond, pushing away my doubts. But the third complication was harder to address, because it came from within myself. About 6 weeks into my time at the castle, I started to feel strange. I'd have moments where I felt like I was on the edge of transforming, like something wild was clawing at the inside of my skin, trying to break free. The magic that Caelan had told me I possessed was growing stronger, awakening, demanding to be used. I found that I could move things with my mind, that I could sense people's emotions from across a room, that I could see things in the dark that should have been invisible. I brought this up to Mrs. Ailsa one afternoon, as we were working on a preservation spell in the castle's apothecary. "It's your magic emerging," she said calmly. "You're a seer, as the laird told you. But you're also a shifter, though not in the traditional sense. Your magic, I believe, will allow you to take on animal forms, likely the form of a hawk or an eagle, given the way your magic is manifesting." "A shifter," I repeated, stunned. "But I'm human. You said shifters were born to human parents only rarely, and usually they show signs from childhood." "Most do," she said. "But you're different, Moira. The laird's magic is incredibly powerful, and the bonding ritual seems to have activated something within you that was dormant. You're not a traditional shifter, and you're not a traditional human anymore either. You're something new. Something that, frankly, I've never encountered before." "Is that dangerous?" I asked, concerned. "Potentially," Mrs. Ailsa said. "Any kind of magic in its raw, uncontrolled state can be dangerous. That's why you're going to train. I've already spoken to Caelan about it. Starting tomorrow morning, you're going to work with Torquil on controlling your magic, on learning to channel it safely. By the time the autumn equinox arrives, you should have decent control over your new abilities." I would have protested that I didn't have time for training, that I was already overwhelmed with learning about werewolf politics and history and culture. But I could feel through the bond that Caelan was already aware of this plan, and he was in complete agreement with it. So I didn't protest. The training sessions with Torquil were intense and often humbling. The scarred warrior had a patience I wouldn't have expected from someone so fierce, but he also had absolutely no tolerance for half-efforts or self-doubt. He taught me to meditate, to center myself, to find the core of my magic and learn to control it rather than letting it control me. He taught me breathing techniques and visualization exercises. And most importantly, he taught me how to shift. The first time I successfully shifted into my animal form was exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. My bones felt like they were being remolded. My skin felt like it was splitting open, but there was no pain, only a strange electric sensation of transformation. One moment I was standing in my human form, and the next I was a hawk, my wings spread wide. The world spread out beneath me in a way I'd never experienced before. Flying, true flying, not in an airplane but on my own wings, was indescribable. I could feel the wind currents, could sense the temperature changes, could see with a clarity that made the human world seem dull and muted. And below me, standing in the clearing where I'd transformed, was Caelan. His massive wolf form watching me with what I could only describe as pride. I spent hours flying that first day, exploring the Highlands from a perspective that changed everything. I'd always loved these mountains, but seeing them from the air, truly understanding their vastness and their ancient power, made me fall in love with them all over again. When I finally shifted back to my human form, Caelan was waiting with clothes and a warm cloak. He wrapped me in his arms, and I could feel his joy and pride and love flowing through the bond. "You're magnificent," he murmured into my hair. "Everything I knew you would be." Over the next 2 weeks, my control over my shifting improved dramatically. I could transform almost instantaneously now, and I was beginning to understand the nuances of my hawk form, how to hunt, though I refused to kill anything unless absolutely necessary, how to ride the thermals, how to communicate with other creatures of the air. But as my power grew, so did the attention it attracted. And not all of that attention was welcome. It started with rumors. Whispers in the castle corridors about a challenger to Caelan's authority. Someone from the southern packs who believed that the Alpha King had grown weak, that his choice to bond with a human was evidence of his declining judgment and power. Someone who was gathering support, building an army of dissidents who wanted to overthrow the current regime. I first learned about it when Caelan called an emergency council meeting. I wasn't invited to the initial meeting. That was for the senior leaders of the pack, but Caelan filled me in on the details afterward. "Lennox McTavish," he told me, pacing back and forth in our private chambers. An old rival from centuries ago. We fought for dominance when we were both young, and I won. He's been biding his time ever since, waiting for an opportunity. And now he thinks he sees one. Why? Yes. What makes him think this is his chance? Because I'm distracted, Caelan said bitterly. Because I'm spending time bonding with you instead of attending to pack matters. Because he thinks I've grown soft. That's ridiculous, I said. You still lead the council meetings. You still make all the important decisions about pack policy. You're as powerful as ever. I know that, Caelan said. But perception matters as much as reality in this world. If enough of the pack believes that I'm no longer fit to lead, there will be a challenge. And if I refuse it, I'll lose my authority anyway. I felt a chill run through me. What kind of challenge? Combat, Caelan said. Single combat between me and Lennox, in wolf form. The strongest wins, and the loser either submits or dies. It's an ancient law of our people, one that predates even my rule. That's barbaric, I said, even as I knew that in the werewolf world, trials by combat were not only normal but expected. It's our way, Caelan said simply. And if Lennox issues a formal challenge, I cannot refuse. To do so would prove his claims about my weakness. I pulled Caelan close, pressing my forehead against his chest. Through the bond, I could feel his fear, though he was trying to hide it behind a mask of confidence. Lennox MacTavish was powerful. Caelan had told me about their previous battles centuries ago. It would be a close fight, and there was a real possibility that Caelan could lose. And if he lost, the pack would have a new Alpha King. And I didn't want to think about what would happen to me. We need to prepare, I said, pulling back to look at him. Teach me everything you can about combat, about the ways of the werewolves. If it comes to a fight, I need to be ready to help if I can. You're a healer, Caelan said, shaking his head. Your role is not in combat. I'm also a seer and a shifter, I said firmly. I have magic. Let me learn how to use it in ways that can actually help. I won't be sidelined while the man I love fights for his life. Caelan looked like he wanted to argue, but he could feel my determination through the bond, and he knew I wouldn't back down. So instead of arguing, he simply kissed me. Okay, he said. We'll prepare together. The next week was intense. During the day, I continued my training with Torquil, but now I was learning combat magic alongside my other skills. He taught me offensive spells, defensive barriers, ways to amplify my power. I learned that my magic had an affinity for the elements, earth and wind primarily, and I could use them as weapons if needed. In the evenings, Caelan and I would spend hours together, bonding, talking about what we wanted for the future. We talked about the possibility of having children. He had had Murdoch centuries ago, but the boy's mother had been a human, and she had passed away generations past from old age while Caelan remained unchanged. He told me that our children would be extraordinary, that they would inherit both our strengths. And for the first time I allowed myself to imagine a future with him, a life that extended beyond the next battle. But the challenge came sooner than expected. It arrived in the form of a messenger, a young werewolf with dark hair and a scar that ran down the left side of his face. He came to the castle gates 3 weeks after our initial conversation about Lennox MacTavish, and he demanded to speak with the Alpha King. Caelan received the messenger in the Great Hall, with me and the council present. The young werewolf knelt before Caelan and delivered his message in a formal, unwavering voice. Lennox MacTavish, Alpha of the Southern Packs, challenges you, Caelan MacLeod, Alpha King of the Highlands, for supremacy, the messenger said. He claims that you have grown weak and unfit to lead. He calls for single combat, in wolf form, to be held at the Standing Stones of Callanish 1 month hence. If you refuse, he will take your refusal as proof of your weakness, and the packs will choose a new leader. The great hall was silent. Every face turned toward Caelan, waiting to see how he would respond. Caelan stood, his physical form unchanged but his power rolling outward in waves that I could feel even from where I stood. His amber eyes burned bright with barely contained fury. Tell Lennox that I accept his challenge, Caelan said, his voice cold and cutting. Tell him that I will meet him at the standing stones of Callanish 1 month from today. And tell him that when I defeat him, and I will defeat him, he can spend eternity knowing that he brought his own destruction down upon himself. The messenger nodded, looking impressed by Caelan's response despite having known what it would be. He turned and left without another word, and as soon as he was gone, the great hall erupted into activity. The council began discussing strategy, logistics, the rules of combat. Mrs. Ailsa immediately began gathering herbs and supplies for healing, knowing that regardless of who won the battle, there would be injuries to tend. I remained silent, standing in the shadows at the edge of the great hall, and I felt Caelan's gaze find me. The bond between us sang with tension and fear and love and determination. He excused himself from the council and came to me, pulling me away from the bustle of activity into a quiet corridor. "This is what I was afraid of," he said, running a hand through his dark hair. "That I would have to fight to maintain my position, and that you would be caught in the middle of it. I chose to bond with you," I said firmly. "Which means I chose this life, with all its complications and dangers. We face this together." "Together," Caelan echoed, pulling me into his arms. "Though if anything happened to you, I don't think I could survive it." "Then we'll make sure nothing happens to either of us," I said, with more confidence than I felt. The month passed in a blur of preparation. Caelan spent hours every day training, shifting into his wolf form and sparring with Torquil and the other pack warriors. I could feel his muscles building, his magic strengthening. He was becoming more formidable by the day, a living weapon of pure power and control. But I could also feel his doubt, his uncertainty about whether he was strong enough. You see, the bond between us was so strong that I could sense his internal struggles, his fears. Lennox had spent centuries training in isolation, honing his skills, waiting for the opportunity to challenge. Caelan had spent those same centuries leading an entire people, managing politics and disputes, dealing with administrative matters. He was out of practice in a way, though still incredibly powerful. I threw myself into my own training with equal intensity. By the end of the month, I could shift into my hawk form and back almost unconsciously. I could summon wind with a gesture and make the earth itself shake beneath my feet. Torquil even began to hint that I might have other forms available to me, that my magic was still developing, still evolving. The night before the battle, Caelan and I made love with a desperate intensity born of uncertainty about the future. After, we lay in each other's arms, and he told me things he'd never shared with anyone. His doubts about his ability to lead, his fears that he wasn't strong enough, his desperate hope that our bond would somehow make him stronger, give him the motivation to win. "I've lived for over 500 years, he said softly, running his fingers through my hair. "I've won countless battles, led my people through wars and famines and plagues. But I've never felt the way I feel with you. I've never cared about surviving as much as I care about coming back to you. That makes me vulnerable, Moira. And in a battle like the one I'm about to fight, vulnerability can be fatal." "No," I said, lifting my head to look at him. "Vulnerability is what makes you human, or as human as a werewolf can be. And it's also what makes you strong. Because now you have something to fight for beyond power or pride. You have someone who loves you more than life itself. And I promise you, Caelan, I will do everything in my power to make sure you come home to me." We left for the standing stones of Callanish at dawn. The location was on the Isle of Lewis, a sacred place where the werewolves conducted their most important ceremonies and trials. There was already a massive gathering when we arrived. Hundreds of werewolves from every pack in the British Isles, drawn by the promise of witnessing a trial by combat for the position of Alpha King. The standing stones themselves were ancient, predating human civilization by thousands of years. 13 massive monoliths stood in a rough circle, arranged in a pattern that seemed to hold ancient power and magic. As Caelan and I approached, I could feel the raw energy thrumming through the earth, could sense the presence of countless generations of werewolves who had stood in this same place. Lennox MacTavish was already there, waiting. He was a massive werewolf even in human form, easily as tall and broad as Caelan, with red hair and a scarred face that spoke of countless battles. He looked at me with undisguised contempt, and through the bond, I could feel Caelan's rage at the disrespect. The ceremony began with the arrival of an elder, a werewolf so old that even Caelan addressed him with deference. The elder, whose name was Werewolf MacLeod, a distant ancestor of Caelan's, stood between the two men and outlined the rules. It would be a fight to the death or submission, with no outside interference allowed. The winner would take the position of Alpha King and all that came with it. The loser would either die or, if they survived, would be exiled from werewolf society. Caelan and Lennox disrobed and walked to the center of the standing stones. I stood with Murdoch, who had insisted on witnessing his father's battle, and Mrs. Ailsa, who watched with ancient eyes that had seen countless battles before this one. When the elder gave the signal, both men shifted simultaneously. Caelan's wolf form was magnificent, a beast the size of a large horse, with midnight black fur and enormous paws that could crush bone. Lennox's form was equally impressive, a massive gray wolf with a scarred muzzle and eyes that burned with fury. They circled each other for a moment, and then Lennox attacked. The sound of their collision was like thunder. They crashed together in a tangle of fur and fangs and claws, and the gathered werewolves erupted into cheers. I felt my heart leap into my throat as I watched Caelan and Lennox fight with a ferocity that was almost impossible to process. These were creatures of pure power, moving at speeds that were barely comprehensible to the human eye. Lennox was strong, incredibly so, but Caelan was faster and more cunning. He anticipated his opponent's moves, dodging attacks and countering with his own. But Lennox had centuries of preparation behind every strike, and the batters were closely matched. They fought for what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes. Both wolves were bleeding, their fur matted with blood, their bodies moving with a weariness that spoke of the incredible effort they were expending. Then, in a moment that changed everything, Caelan managed to dodge one of Lennox's attacks and came around from behind, sinking his fangs deep into his opponent's shoulder. Lennox shrieked in pain and fury, wrenching himself away, but in doing so, he exposed his flank. Caelan didn't hesitate. He moved with the grace of a predator, and he delivered a blow that sent Lennox crashing to the ground. For a moment, everything went silent. Lennox lay on his side, bleeding heavily, unable to rise. The gathered werewolves held their breath, waiting to see what Caelan would do. He could have killed Lennox. He could have made the final, fatal blow and ensured that his rival would never pose a threat again. And part of the crowd was expecting him to do exactly that. But instead, Caelan shifted back to his human form and stood over his defeated opponent. "I could kill you," he said, his voice carrying across the standing stones. "That's what the old laws say I should do. But I'm not ruled by the old laws. I'm ruled by something far more powerful, by the desire to be a leader worthy of the people I serve. And killing a man who's already been defeated is not the act of a worthy leader." He gestured to Torquil and the other healers. "Take him, bind his wounds, and then escort him to the border of our lands. Tell him he has one day to leave the British Isles, or the penalty for returning will be death." The crowd erupted in cheers. It was clear that Caelan's mercy had impressed them more than any killing blow could have. He had won not just through strength, but through the kind of wisdom and compassion that made him worthy of the position he held. Caelan turned, his amber eyes finding mine through the crowd, and I knew that he had won for me. That he had fought not just for his people, but for the future we would build together. The celebration after the battle lasted 3 days. The werewolves feasted and danced and made merry, confident in their leader's continued strength and wisdom. I stayed close to Caelan's side, and I felt the respect of the pack shifting, changing. Where there had been doubt before, there was now acceptance. Where there had been whispers of my unsuitability, there was now acknowledgement that I had played a role in Caelan's victory, that my love and support had given him the strength to overcome his opponent. 3 months after the battle, I discovered that I was pregnant. It was a shock, even though Caelan had mentioned the possibility before. I'd always imagined pregnancy as something that happened to other people, not to me. But when the healers confirmed it, I felt a rush of joy so powerful that I actually cried. Caelan's reaction was even more intense. He picked me up and swung me around, laughing with pure delight, and when he set me down, his eyes were wet with tears. Through the bond, I could feel the depth of his happiness, his gratitude to the fates that had given us this gift. "A child," he whispered, placing his hand on my still flat belly. "Our child. A new generation, born of both worlds, both human and werewolf. This is a sign that the fates approve of our union." My pregnancy was easy compared to what Mrs. Ailsa had warned me it might be. Yes, I was tired in the early months, and I had cravings for the strangest combinations of food. But I didn't experience the severe morning sickness or complications that sometimes occurred when a human carried a werewolf child. Apparently, my newfound magical abilities were protecting both me and the baby, ensuring a healthy pregnancy. The castle prepared for the birth with a kind of ceremonial excitement. Mrs. Ailsa personally oversaw my care, making sure I ate well and got enough rest. Caelan hovered over me like a protective lion, and Murdoch took his role as older brother incredibly seriously, often placing his hand on my belly to feel the baby kick and talking to the child about the adventures they would have together once he or she was born. By the time my due date arrived, I felt like I was part of something far larger than myself. Not just because I was carrying Caelan's child, but because I was now truly a member of the werewolf community. The pack had accepted me. I had proven myself during the battle, had shown courage and strength. I had earned my place here. And then, on a crisp February morning, my daughter was born. She was perfect, a tiny, perfect human infant with a shock of dark hair and eyes that were an unusual mix of amber and green, a blend of her father's and my own genetics. We named her Ailey, an old Scottish name meaning radiant, because from the moment she was born, she seemed to glow with an inner light. I lay in bed, exhausted but elated, cradling my daughter against my chest. Caelan sat beside me, his large hand cradling both Ailey and my own hand, his eyes never leaving our child's face. "She's beautiful," he whispered. "Just like her mother." "She has your eyes," I said softly. "No," Caelan said, reaching out to gently stroke his daughter's forehead. "She has her mother's courage. I can already feel it in the bond. She's going to be extraordinary, Moira. She's going to be a bridge between our world and yours." As I lay there, holding my daughter, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. It seemed impossible that it had only been 6 months since I'd pulled a drowning boy from the loch. That one impulsive act of compassion had changed my entire life, had brought me to a world of magic and power and love beyond anything I could have imagined. But it was real. All of it was real. The man I loved was real. The magic that flowed through my veins was real. The castle in the mountains was real. And this perfect, precious life in my arms was the most real thing of all. I stood on the castle ramparts, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. Ailey was asleep in her crib in the nursery, exhausted from a day of play and learning. Murdoch was in the library with his tutor, preparing for the responsibilities he would one day inherit. And Caelan was in a meeting with the council, dealing with some pack matter or other. Our life had settled into a rhythm that was both supernatural and utterly ordinary. I was no longer the confused woman who had pulled a boy from the water a year ago. I was Moira MacLeod, mate to the Alpha King, mother to a beautiful daughter, a seer and a shifter and a bridge between two worlds. I had found my place in this life, had discovered purpose and meaning and love beyond measure. Through the bond, I felt Caelan's attention turn toward me. He was wrapping up his meeting, I could tell, and would be coming to find me soon. It had become our evening ritual. We would spend an hour together, just the two of us before dinner and the evening's activities. I smiled, anticipating his arrival. A year ago, if someone had told me that I would find love with a werewolf, that I would bond with an Alpha King, that I would bear his child and feel completely at peace with it, I would have thought they were insane. But now, looking back at my old life, at the quiet emptiness of those days, I couldn't imagine ever going back. The footsteps on the stone stairs told me that Caelan was approaching. I turned from the ramparts and waited, my heart quickening at the knowledge that he was near. This reaction had never faded, had only grown stronger as our bond deepened. Every time I saw him, it was like falling in love all over again. He emerged onto the ramparts, still dressed in the formal attire he wore for council meetings, a dark tunic embossed with silver, trousers of fine wool, boots polished to a mirror shine. But as soon as he saw me, he shed the formal demeanor like an old skin, and he smiled, that genuine, unguarded smile that I'd come to treasure. "There you are," he said, coming to me and wrapping his arms around me from behind. "I've been searching for you." "You've been in meetings all afternoon," I said, leaning back against his chest. I didn't want to interrupt. "You could never interrupt," he said, pressing a kiss to my hair. "There's nothing more important to me than you. You know that." Through the bond, I could feel the truth of his words. He meant them completely and absolutely. The power and responsibilities of his position meant nothing compared to his love for me and our family. "How was your meeting?" I asked. "Tedious," he said. "Torquil wants to increase the number of sentries guarding the southern border. Ailsa is concerned about some unusual activity from the sea wolves in the west. Gregor thinks we need to reform our treaty with the continental pacts. All important matters, but nothing that required my immediate attention." "You're a good leader," I said, turning to face him. "You care about your people, but you don't let the weight of it consume you." "I've learned that from you," Caelan said, his amber eyes soft. "Before you came into my life, I spent centuries believing that being a good leader meant being completely immersed in my work, sacrificing my personal life for the good of the pack. But you've taught me that a leader is stronger when they have someone they love. That the desire to protect my family makes me more fierce, more determined, more capable." He kissed me then, a slow, deep kiss that spoke of years of devotion and love. We stood there on the ramparts as the sun continued its descent below the horizon, and I marveled at how completely my life had transformed. "I have something to tell you," Caelan said, pulling back slightly. "Something I've been planning for weeks." "What?" I asked, immediately curious. "We're going to make a formal announcement to the entire pack," he said. "Not just the council, but all the werewolves in the Highlands and beyond. We're going to tell them that you are now officially recognized as Alpha Queen, not just as my mate. That you have authority to speak on behalf of the pack when I am not present. That you are a leader in your own right." I felt my breath catch. "Caelan, I'm not sure I'm ready for that kind of responsibility." "You are," he said firmly. "More ready than you know. You've already proven yourself to the pack. They respect you. They trust you. And frankly, having you as an official leader will help stabilize the realm. If anything ever happened to me—" "Don't," I interrupted, touching my fingers to his lips. "Don't even say it." "I have to," he said gently. "Life is uncertain, even for those of us who have lived for centuries. And I need to know that if something happened, our people would be taken care of. That Ailey and Murdoch would be protected by someone strong and wise and capable. And that person is you." I felt tears prickling at my eyes. The weight of what he was offering me, trusting me with not just his heart, but with the future of his people, was overwhelming. "When?" I asked. "A month from now," Caelan said. "At the spring equinox. We'll hold a ceremony at the sacred grove, similar to the bonding ceremony we had. The entire pack will witness your acceptance into this role. What do you think?" "I think," I said slowly, "that I'm terrified and honored in equal measure. But yes, I'll do it." Caelan pulled me close, and we stood together as darkness fell over the mountains. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear a wolf howling, a sound that once would have frightened me, but now filled me with a sense of belonging. I was part of this world now, truly and completely. I was no longer an outsider looking in. I was home. The month leading up to the spring equinox was a whirlwind of preparation. I worked with Mrs. Ailsa and Ailsa Mackenzie to prepare myself for the responsibilities of being an Alpha Queen. I learned the intricate political systems that govern the werewolf realm. I studied the treaties and alliances that held the pack together. I learned the history of the queens who had come before me, their triumphs and their failures. I also continued my training with Torquil, but now it took on a different character. Instead of learning combat and magic purely for personal defense, I was learning how to use those skills as a queen, how to command respect through both power and wisdom, how to make life or death decisions with clarity and compassion. Caelan was supportive but hands-off during this period. He knew that I needed to find my own way into this role, that having him constantly present would only diminish my authority. Through the bond, I could feel his confidence in me, his belief that I was capable of handling whatever challenges came my way. By the time the spring equinox arrived, I felt ready, or at least as ready as one could be for such a momentous occasion. The ceremony took place at sunset, in the sacred grove where Caelan and I had first formally bonded. The entire pack had gathered, thousands of werewolves from every corner of the Highlands, representing every faction and family line. They stood in concentric circles around the stone circle at the heart of the grove, their eyes glowing with amber light as the sun descended toward the horizon. I wore a gown of deep emerald silk, embroidered with silver thread in patterns that represented the various packs that made up our realm. Around my neck hung a pendant of silver and amber, a gift from Caelan that bore his family crest and would mark me as his mate and queen to all who saw it. Caelan stood at the center of the stone circle, waiting for me. I walked toward him, my head held high, and I could feel the weight of thousands of gazes upon me. Some were approving, some were curious, a few still held traces of doubt. But I didn't let any of it affect me. I had earned this. I had proved myself a dozen times over. When I reached Caelan, he took my hands and turned me so that I faced the gathered pack. The elder, Caelan MacLeod, stepped forward and began the ceremony. "Moira MacLeod," he intoned, his ancient voice carrying across the grove. "You stand before this assembly as the mate of our Alpha King. You have proven yourself brave and true, a warrior and a protector, a mother and a leader. You have bridged the gap between the human world and our own, showing that the divisions between our peoples need not be absolute. The question now is, will you accept the title and responsibilities of Alpha Queen? Will you stand beside Caelan MacLeod and together lead our people into the future?" I took a deep breath, feeling the magnitude of the moment. This was my crossroads. I could say no, could step away from this responsibility and return to being simply Caelan's mate. But I knew that's not what I wanted. "I will," I said, my voice strong and clear. "I accept the title of Alpha Queen. I pledge to serve our people with wisdom and compassion. I pledge to protect those who cannot protect themselves. I pledge to stand beside Caelan and our children, and to do everything in my power to ensure the safety and prosperity of all who dwell in these mountains." The stones around us flared to life, brilliant light shooting upward and outward, illuminating the entire grove in ethereal radiance. I felt power flow into me, not replacing my own magic, but amplifying it, strengthening it, binding it to the land and the pack in ways I couldn't fully comprehend. It was like electricity flowing through my veins, like becoming one with the ancient magic that had sustained these mountains for millennia. When the light faded, the entire pack erupted in howls of approval. The sound was deafening, exhilarating, and I felt tears streaming down my face. Caelan pulled me close and kissed me, and the howls grew even louder. From that moment on, everything changed. Suddenly, people who had been dismissive or uncertain about me began treating me with the respect due to a queen. I began attending council meetings regularly, offering my perspective on important decisions. I established a program to help young werewolves struggling with their dual nature. I worked with the healers to establish clinics in remote areas where pack members could receive medical care. But most importantly, I created a legacy that went beyond my own lifetime. I worked with Mrs. Ailsa to document the history and traditions of the werewolf people, creating a written record that had previously existed only in oral tradition. I established a council of queens, myself and the mates of high-ranking pack members, that allowed women to have a collective voice in matters that affected the entire pack. 2 years after I pulled Murdoch from the loch, Caelan and I welcomed our second child, a son we named Torquil, after the warrior who had trained me so faithfully. Where Ailey had been born with an almost otherworldly grace, Torquil was all energy and mischief from the moment he entered the world. He was a creature of chaos and joy, and Caelan absolutely doted on him. Life in the castle had become routine in the most beautiful way. I would wake in the morning to the sound of the Highland birds singing outside our window. I would help Ailey prepare for her lessons with her tutor. I would spend time with Murdoch, who was growing into a fine young man and taking on more responsibilities in pack governance. I would attend council meetings or work on various community projects. And every evening without fail I would spend time with Caelan, sometimes talking, sometimes making love, sometimes simply sitting together in companionable silence, feeling the bond between us hum with contentment. My relationship with Siobhan had evolved over time as well. She had initially remained skeptical of my abilities and my place in Caelan's life, but after witnessing my performance during the battle with Lennox MacTavish and seeing how much stronger Caelan became with me at his side, she began to soften. By the time Ailey was born, Siobhan was almost friendly, and by the time Torquil arrived, she had become one of my closest confidants in the pack. One afternoon, about 6 months after Torquil's birth, Siobhan and I sat in the castle garden with our children playing nearby. Ailey was chasing butterflies, her hawk form flickering in and out of visibility. She was learning to shift and was still having trouble maintaining a form for extended periods. Torquil was napping in his cradle, his small fist curled around a strand of his father's hair that Caelan had given him as a teething toy. "I want to apologize," Siobhan said suddenly, staring out at her niece playing in the garden. "For the way I treated you when you first came here. For doubting you. You were protecting your brother," I said, understanding. "And you were protecting your people. You were doing what you thought was best. I don't hold it against you." "You should," Siobhan said. "I was cruel. I said terrible things. But you've proven yourself to be everything I was afraid you weren't. You're a true queen, Moira. Not by virtue of your bonding to Caelan, but by who you are as a person." I reached over and squeezed her hand. "Thank you for saying that. And thank you for becoming my friend. I have to admit, when I first arrived here, I didn't have many people I could talk to. You were distant. But now, I don't know what I would do without you." Siobhan smiled, and for a moment, I saw vulnerability in her fierce eyes. "I've lived for a very long time," she said. "And I've learned that it's rare to find people who are genuinely good, who put others' needs before their own, who have the strength to change and grow. You're rare, Moira." Caelan recognized that, and I'm grateful that he did. Because having you here, being part of this pack, has changed all of us for the better. On my 30th birthday, 6 years after I pulled Murdoch from the loch, the entire pack gathered to celebrate. Mrs. Ailsa had prepared an enormous feast, with foods both traditional and experimental. There were games and dancing and music that lasted long into the night. Even the perpetually serious Torquil allowed himself to smile and enjoy the festivities. But the greatest gift came from an unexpected source. As the celebration was winding down, an old woman approached me. She was ancient, far older than even Mrs. Ailsa, with white hair and eyes that seemed to contain the weight of centuries. Her name was Catriona, and she was the keeper of the pack's oral traditions. "I have something for you," she said, pressing a small leather-bound journal into my hands. "This has been passed down through the pack for longer than anyone remembers. It contains the stories of the greatest queens who have ever led our people. And tonight, I've written your story in these pages. You are the first human queen we've ever had, and your story deserves to be remembered." I opened the journal with trembling hands. The pages were filled with Catriona's beautiful handwriting, telling the story of my life. From the day I pulled Murdoch from the water, through my bonding with Caelan, through the trials and tribulations I'd faced, to my coronation and my work as queen. It was written with such tenderness and understanding, such recognition of both my strength and my humanity, that I found myself weeping. "Thank you," I whispered. "This is the most precious gift anyone has ever given me." "You've earned it," Catriona said, patting my hand. "Your journey has inspired us all, shown us that the boundaries between our worlds are not as fixed as we believed. You are a bridge, Moira. A bridge between worlds, between species, between past and future. That is a rare and beautiful thing. Later that night, after the celebration had ended and the castle had grown quiet, I stood once again on the ramparts, looking out at the moonlit Highlands. Caelan found me there as he always did, and wrapped his arms around me from behind. "Happy birthday," he said, pressing a kiss to the top of my head. "It's been the most wonderful day," I said. "But you know what the best part is?" "What?" he asked. "That I got to spend it with you. With our family. With our people. 6 years ago, I couldn't have imagined this life. I couldn't have imagined any of this was possible. But now it feels like the only life that makes sense. Like all the strange feelings and intuitions I had my whole life were preparing me for this moment, for this love, for this purpose." "I know exactly what you mean," Caelan said. "I waited 500 years for you, Moira. I didn't know it at the time. I didn't even know I was waiting. But now I understand. Every moment of my life before you was preparation for becoming the man you deserve, the leader your people needed, the father our children require. You are the completion of my soul, the answer to questions I didn't know to ask." He turned me around and took my face in his hands, his amber eyes glowing softly in the moonlight. "I love you," he said. "With everything I am, with every fiber of my being, with more intensity than I thought possible. And I will love you in this life and in every life that comes after, until the stars themselves grow cold." We kissed under the Highland moon, and I felt the bond between us pulse with such force that I gasped. This was real. All of it was real. The love, the magic, the family, the purpose, it was all real and it was mine. As I look back on this journey, from the day I was a nurse in a small village to the day I became an alpha queen, I'm struck by how small the moment that changed everything was. One afternoon by a loch. One drowning child. One impulsive decision to help. That's all it took to transform my entire existence. But I've learned that life doesn't work in the way we expect it to. We're not in control nearly as much as we think we are. There are forces greater than ourselves, currents that carry us toward our destiny if we're willing to swim with them instead of against them. The fates brought me to Caelan, yes, but I had to be brave enough to accept that gift, strong enough to handle the challenges that came with it, and willing enough to transform myself into someone capable of standing beside him. I often think back to that moment by the loch, when Caelan first looked at me with those glowing amber eyes, and I remember thinking that nothing would ever be the same again. I was right. My old life is gone, replaced by something far more beautiful and meaningful. I no longer work at the hospital. I no longer live in my small cottage in Bala. That Moira is someone from a lifetime ago. But I haven't lost anything in the exchange. I've gained everything. I've found love beyond measure. I found family and purpose and meaning. I've found magic and wonder and the kind of life that most people only dream about. If you're listening to this story, and you're somewhere out there wondering if your life will ever change, if magic will ever find you, if love will ever transform you the way it transformed me, I'm here to tell you that it can. That it will, if you're brave enough to recognize it when it appears and willing enough to take the leap into the unknown. The city you're watching from right now, whatever city that is, whatever brought you to listen to this tale, it doesn't matter. What matters is that you're here with me, that you've taken this journey with me, that you've allowed yourself to believe, if only for a moment, that there's more to the world than what meets the eye. So here's what I want to leave you with. I want you to remember that you are capable of extraordinary things. That love, real love, is worth fighting for and dying for and transforming yourself for. That magic exists all around you, waiting for you to open your eyes and recognize it. And that the moment that changes your life might come in the smallest, most unexpected way. But when it does, you need to be brave enough to embrace it. Caelan and I are still here, in our castle in the Highlands, with our children and our pack. Ailey is growing into her powers as a shifter and a seer, showing signs that she will be even more powerful than either of her parents. Torquil is displaying the warrior spirit of his namesake, already training to become a protector of the pack. And our youngest, Royson, born just last winter, is showing signs of being a healer, a gift she inherited from me. This life, this love, this magic, it's real. And if you're reading this, if some part of you is calling out for something more, for magic and adventure and a love that transforms you, I'm sending that to you now. I'm sending you a hug across the distance. I'm sending you hope. I'm sending you the belief that your life can change just as dramatically as mine did. The key is being brave enough to save someone else. Being brave enough to see magic when it presents itself. And being brave enough to love with your whole heart. Consequences be damned. That's the real story here. Not just the fairy tale ending, but the courage it took to get there. The fear I had to overcome. The doubts I had to push through. The wounds I had to be willing to open myself up to being hurt, because without that vulnerability, without that willingness to take the risk, love never would have found me. So here's my final gift to you, dear listener, wherever you are in the world. Be brave. Be open. Be willing to help others even when it costs you something. Be willing to believe in magic. And most importantly, be willing to love with everything you have, knowing that the greatest risks often bring the greatest rewards. Thank you for coming on this journey with me. Thank you for believing in this story, for letting yourself fall into this world of werewolves and magic and epic romance. And thank you for reminding me that these stories, while they belong to the supernatural realm, carry truths that are very much applicable to our own lives. The Alpha King's pup is safe now, growing strong and healthy with his father and his new family. The loch where it all began still calls to me sometimes, and I visit when I can, remembering the woman I was and marveling at the woman I've become. And somewhere, in the moonlit depths of time, the fates are already planning the next great love story, the next impossible romance, the next moment that will change someone's entire world. I hope that moment finds you. I hope you find your own Alpha King, or your own healing magic, or your own reason to believe that life is far more wondrous than we're taught to expect. Until we meet again, wherever you are in this vast and magical world, know that you are never truly alone. The magic is real. The love is real. And you are worthy of the extraordinary life that awaits you. This is Moira MacLeod, Alpha Queen of the Highlands, signing off. May your life be filled with the kind of magic and love that changes everything. Goodbye for now, my friend. But not forever.